Okay, last question for Unit 3. So I picked this question even though we already compared two histograms because of part B. So for the first part, it asks you to compare distributions. Hopefully by now, with the last couple of examples, you figured out that you need to be using SOCs. State your shapes, state your outliers, state and compare the centers, which are the medians, and the spread, which is the range or the IQR. So the shape of the distribution of households are skewed right for both 1950 and 2000. Neither graph has outliers. The median household size for 1950, 5 people, is greater than 2003 people. The range of household size is greater in 1950 than in 2000, 13 people versus 11 people. Essentially correct if the response correctly compares center or location. So I compared the center or the median. I compared it, so I said greater. And then section 2 is also part, so I got 1E. So the center is the first E. And then section 2, essentially correct if they compared variability for both distributions. Variability is either the range or the IQR. So here's my range. I compared it. I said it was greater. So I have that. So this is section 1. And then we have section 2, which is the variability, which I have. Section 3, essentially correct if the response includes context related to the variable of interest, household size. So I said household size right here. So section 3, you needed your context. And you had to identify the shapes. You don't actually compare shapes, you just identify them. Which I did. I said it's skewed right for both. So it's kind of a comparison still. So I have both of those at my context. And I had my shape. So again, they didn't take off for the outliers, but you don't know what they're going to do. They're going to take off for outliers for sure if there are outliers and you don't mention them. Just always put it and you'll always be safe. So if you identified both shapes but you didn't include context, that was partial. Or if you identified one of the shapes and included context, that was partial. But if you didn't identify the shapes at all, it was incorrect. Section 4, essentially correct if the response correctly states and checks the following 2 conditions. The data come from independent random samples. So I stated that and I checked it, so that's good. And normality / sample size conditions. So here's how I worded it. Let's see what they put up here. So they actually checked 3 assumptions. They also checked the independence, the population size are at least 10n, or 10 times the sample size. Remember, that is an optional one that you can check, but it's not required. The other 2, they listed both of those. Said the first condition is satisfied because it says it. The second condition is satisfied because the sample sizes, 500 in each group, are quite large despite the right skewness of the distribution of household size in the sample graph. So I said, even though the graphs are both skewed right, both distributions would be normal because the sample sizes, 500 each, are sufficiently large, greater than 30. You didn't have to say the central limit theorem tells you this, but if you remembered that, good job. I have both of those. So I have both components. If you remembered both of those assumptions and you justified them, that's essentially correct. If you did one of the two, it's partially correct. Or if you just state the assumptions, but you didn't actually check them and verify it, then that is a partially correct. So, and this is another one of those where, so I got an E here. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4 E's. Each E counts as 1 point. So I had 4 out of 4. Each P counts as half a point. And remember, they do holistically try to determine what your score would be. If it was a very, very minor thing, then you would get a 4 out of 4 if you had 3.5. But if it was a bigger thing, probably a 3 out of 4. It's always better to underestimate your scores now so that you work harder rather than thinking you're already good and stopping now.